at some point, let's like set up like a meeting so we can really like hash out that.
Sounds great, yeah.
Okay. Because if we just say we'll do it, we might forget. So like, let's actually.
I'll follow up with you, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, hi, welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Vanette. I'm Outreach Coordinator here at the Castle Museum, and it's my pleasure to host you for our Lunch and Learns. A couple housekeeping announcements. If you need a restroom at any point during the presentation, feel free to make your way to that back door, and there's a restroom just to the right as you go out. I had to think about my left or my right there for a moment, but we're okay. We're all good. There's also some refreshments on the back table. Feel free to help yourself to that at any point as well. Lunch and Learns happen every second and fourth Tuesday, so our next one will be, I think, September 10th, if I have that date correct. It's the second Tuesday. If I said the wrong number, just know that that's what I mean. And we have Leo Lafarge, who is a librarian over at Hoyt Library, and some people know him from Murder Club, and he is going to dust off an old cold case, and we're going to have a little Saginaw true crime. So that should be really fun, and I hope you join us for that. The other thing I want to put on your radar is we're soon going to open a traveling exhibit called Spies in Space, Toys of the Cold War Era. This is going to be a look at the Cold War from the US and Soviet perspective, but all through the lens of toys. All those toys that came out related to espionage and also the space race. So it should be really great. On September 14th, we're going to have a big exhibit opening. There will be a curator talk. The curator of it will have traveled here. He will talk about his collection, how he got into it, answer your questions about it, and wear your best Cold War era costumes, because then we're going to have a little costume party fun in the exhibit with some treats, and it'll be great. So I'm still working on my costume, but it will be great. So I have faith in all of you. You can deck out and with the best of them. All right, any questions about that before we move on? Okay. So today, it's my pleasure to welcome Alex Mixter. What did I say we were going to call you? Saginawian extraordinaire. Many of you know him from his work in the community in historical preservation, but also being, I think, Saginaw's #1 cheerleader, spending a lot of time helping this community to embrace what we have, celebrate what we have, and bring back what we have. So I'm just really happy he's here to talk with us about some of those projects and some things he has going on. So please welcome Alex.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. So I've talked about this house in particular a couple times here now. So who knows about the Lee Mansion or the Lee Commons or the Cat Lady House or Rosemary DeJezero's house, however you may know it? Is there anyone who does not know which house this is? We've got 2 people. Okay, so that is, I like to open with that because usually when people ask me why this house, that's usually the answer. In pretty much any crowd that I'm in, about 90% of the crowd knows this house in particular. They might have a myth about it too. They might have some kind of story, attached to it. But the thing that I wanted to kind of focus on today relating to this, and I'm going to give some context on how this all came about, what the history is of this house as well, just a brief history. But the main thing that I'd like to do is kind of demystify the thing that drives me absolutely crazy with this house, where people act like this is an impossible task, that taking on a restoration project is going to be something that will consume your whole life. That part is true. But the other part is that it's not possible, it's way too expensive, it's not worth it. There's a number of things that I hear. So I kind of want to go over how my transition from being a video guy to an advocate for historic places, how that happened and how that transition is actually a lot easier than you'd expect. But I kind of wanted to introduce myself to kind of explain who I am, what I do, and everything too. I'm involved in a number of things. The main thing is the Lee Commons, and I've been doing that since 2018 now. In about 3 days, it's going to be year number 6, so it's an anniversary that we've been doing this. I'm also involved at Potter Street Station as a board member. I'm the chair of the maintenance committee there. I have the small task of putting a roof on a train station, which is, we have a $100,000 project with a $2,000 budget, and we're actually making amazing headway. So even more in terms of what you think might not be doable, that train station is a great example of what actually can be done. I've been on the Historic District Commission, and I've been the chair since 2019. And that's another great place where we get to see who's working on their houses in these districts, but also getting to know what homes we have in the area, what kind of buildings we have, and that kind of inventory. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I have coming up in the future, because we have a whole new community development corporation that we just recently founded that is going to be doing a lot more of this type of work. And I'm primarily a videographer, and I founded Hound Lad Films in 2015. So there are a number of things that I do, and that's just kind of a crash course. But I wanted to start with this. Who's seen this movie? Okay, this is probably the #1 thing that people bring when I tell them that I like old houses. They call them money pits. Does anyone know how this movie ends? They fixed the house and got married in front of it. It was a beautiful ending. The people who sold it to them were con artists, and all the problems related to the house were a con. But they got this beautiful house out of it. So everybody likes to say, oh, that money pit, oh, that's going to be a problem. Well, you might just have a happily ever after life in that house at the end. So, that's one way to look at it. But this is the house. This is where it started around the time that I moved home, right around 2016, which was a very interesting year because, I did that on purpose. I just like to keep people on their toes during my presentations. There was a lot going on at the time. There were multiple discussions going on about what we needed to keep, what we needed to tear down. This came up at a city council meeting. So one of the council members said, I was driving down South Washington, saw this house, looks like crap, we should do something about this. Doing something about that house is one of my least favorite expressions living in Saginaw, because doing something means eliminating the house altogether. And so we thought to ourselves, there has to be something to this. There has to be some legs, to this project, because everyone I talked to loved this house. Everyone that I talked to said, oh, that has to happen. Somebody has to buy that house. Somebody has to fix it up. But how do you do that? So I made a bunch of videos. I got involved and just kind of started exploring it. But the history of this place is unbelievable because of not just how far back it goes into the 1880s, but also the fact that it had so many near-death experiences where, from 2011 to 2012 into 2015 and 2016, this conversation just came and went and came and went. And you have all of these headlines that are maybe, hey, this could happen, this could potentially be something. It's in limbo right now, we're trying to figure it out. But Rosemary is really the reason that a lot of people know this house. Does anybody remember Rosemary? So she was well known in this area for this guy. His name's Chichu. He is her pet leopard, and she would walk him down the street. And I've heard people from City Hall tell me that they knew what time she showed up. They would run to the window and watch as she would walk down the street with this leopard. But the leopard was ultimately just a big cat. And there really was kind of a, just a pet relationship that they had with us. In the newspaper, she was quoted saying that her husband used to ask, do I have to sleep with a leopard's paw in my mouth every night? Which really goes to show what kind of connection they had with this leopard. But the kinds of thing Rosemary got involved with, she really helped to lead the charge for this house, which was called the Weber Mansion. And after the decline of lumber, there was a change where they converted this into the offices to the School Board of Education. And they, at one point, decided this wasn't big enough. They wanted a different facility, so they tore it down. And Rosemary is one of the people who said, you're not going to do that. She filed lawsuits, injunctions with her husband, Roy, who was a lawyer. And this was actually the home of the lawyer of Jesse Hoyt. So if you know the name Hoyt, pretty prominent name. He's the guy who bought the east side, essentially, the entire swath of it, which was a bayou. And he and other people, primarily Norman Little, they had really a huge booster campaign to get this place off the ground. And from a swamp, they built the economic heart of the region. This place was really something. But That battle failed. These beautiful houses like this came down, and this is one of those situations where, there was an era through urban renewal where everybody set out with the old and with the new, and when we did out with the old, not much new filled its place, and now we're seeing that losing these types of things has been, honestly, a tragedy, because if they're still there, we can work with them. If they're not there, we can't. We can just look at pictures and say, wow, that thing was beautiful. And we can just kind of look at what once was, but instead we have a relatively modern structure there now. But this is out my kitchen window, so I missed it. That's for dang sure. But Rosemary's dad was the one who bought the house before her, and he was Dr. Ryan, and he was very significant in the community for a number of things. He was the county coroner at one point. He was the director of the health department. But the really interesting thing is he was one of the last of the horse and buggy doctors that would actually go out to the lumber camps, and he had these insurance certificates that you could buy for St. Mary's Hospital. And it helped you with pretty much anything except for contagious diseases, which I always thought was an interesting thing, because if these were still eligible, COVID would have been a nightmare at St. Mary's because no one would have been insured. But he was also involved when the hospital caught on fire in the Great Fire of 1892. He was leading one of the bucket brigades because they were going from the river with water and passing the buckets along and dousing any embers that floated onto the roof of this hospital to protect it. So he's one of the reasons that this hospital was able to survive. Ironically enough, after his death, that part of the hospital is gone. It would have been right here. They built this on in the 20s. But the part that he fought to protect no longer exists, and we have this massive complex. This was all homes for the longest time too, but the hospital systems tend to kind of expand out into the neighborhood and absorb all the homes around them, which is pretty tragic, because then you don't necessarily have a neighborhood around this. You have acres of parking. While we were doing cleanup in the house, we found one of these old x-rays from 1947. So he actually operated his doctor's office out of the basement of this house. And that was a piece that not many people knew about. And also Rosemary's husband, Roy, he operated a law office out of the house too. So there's all these things. The more that we dug into this, we saw, okay, there's a lot of different chapters to this. But even before him, you have Charles Lee. He's the guy who built the house, which is why we call it the Lee Commons, because we named it after this guy. And he was a lumber baron. And the very unique thing about his role within the community was that he lived amongst his mills, which they were noisy, they were smelly, they burned down very, very often because they produced piles of sawdust. And his house was right here, and this is his planing mill, this is the sawmill, and this is the river. The whole operation, they'd cut down the logs, they'd float down the river, they'd catch them in here, they'd put them in the pen, they'd cut them down, they'd plane them, they'd turn them into doors and into sashes and all kinds of woodwork. So all the woodwork in the house came from his mill. And we have this really interesting, campus dynamic where you don't have your lumber barons right next to their mills that often. That's a very unusual thing. And this is why. He went through multiple fires, and the tenacity of this guy is one thing that I've had to pull from personally when there are slumps within this project, because this guy lost everything multiple times. And he had multiple bills or companies he built up, multiple mills, and then they would catch on fire, and he never had insurance on them. So he would just take total losses and then rebuild. In fact, when one of his mills burned down, he kept paying the people who used to work there because they lost their jobs, but he kept paying them even though he lost everything. And I've always found that to be incredible. One of these fires was started because a guy was smoking a cigar on Water Street, flicked an ash, and it went into one of those piles of sawdust that I mentioned. And we lost 2 whole blocks. And then when they rebuilt those 2 whole blocks, they rebuilt the house that we currently know today. We're pretty sure that the original home that Charles Lee lived in, the original foundation is still there, and they just rebuilt on top of that because everything was a total loss. But they mention, I believe in the newspaper, you'll have to correct me, Matt, because Matt's the guy who actually knows the most about Charles Lee in this. They had kind of mentioned that, oh shoot, what was it? I lost my train of thought when I was giving you kudos for knowing so much about Lee. But I apologize, I completely lost my train of thought on that. But he constantly had these fires. He constantly rebuilt. Oh, I remember what it was. He found in a newspaper article that they were going to build the house on its exact location, and that's where we kind of got the theory that it is the original foundation and everything like that. When Charles Lee moved out of the lumber mills, he sold one of the mills. Well, after his death, his kids take over the estate, and one of the mills actually went to this guy, Charles Duryea, who built these things. He put a motor inside of a buggy and called it a motor buggy. And he built these cars in the old planing mill, which would have been right here. But in the background of these photos, when he took promotional pictures, we get our first real glimpse of what the house looked like a long time ago. And then there's also cool pictures like this, too, which I just love sharing this photo because they're doing burnouts in the snow in like 1913, and that's kind of, some things never change with people. You give them toys, and this is what they do. But then, really, so going all the way back, we're going to come all the way forward to 2016. I just moved home. These are the headlines. We're saying goodbye to this house. It's being torn down. And we said, well, what else could it be? And then they said there was a huge pushback from the community saying, please don't tear it down. And a realtor stepped up and said, I will list the house. And they said, all right, you got till October. This is April, and he said, yeah, you got till October. Around June of next year, when the sign got pulled out of the yard, I started getting a little nervous because they said October, and we were way past that. And there was no way that they were going to allow us to keep kicking the can down the road. In that process, though, one of the things that happened was there was a group of volunteers who swarmed the house, and they thought, if it looks bad, if that was what brought us here, one of the councilmen saying, it's in bad shape, we need to do something about it, these volunteers did something about it. They showed up, and they just started sprucing up the yard. And that was one of the things that I noticed as a videographer and as a documentary, kind of producer. Like this was the story of all stories for what I was seeing when I moved home. Because there's all these people who are swarming it. So this is one of my first entrances into the house, was saying, hey, look at all these people who care. And then it just kind of evolved from that. So the house originally looked like this, and then after the cleanup, it was looking a little better. They painted the plywood, they cut the grass, they just removed a lot of the blighted elements. And it just kind of goes to show you that one Saturday of work can actually make it a lot less of an eyesore and a little more palatable. It's not perfect, but it's better for sure. One of the things we found in our research, too, was this old listing from around the turn of the century, and it says, owing to the death of the owner, we are authorized we're authorized to sell this beautiful home at a sacrifice and easy terms if desired. Now, easy terms was the thing that we really kind of latched onto as a rallying cry, so to speak. The terms on this were not easy. They had a development agreement in place that was, you need a new roof, you needed new gutters, you need to completely tuck point the house, you got to eliminate all those blighted pieces, you got to do this, within 6 months, or we take the house back. And so your average person who looked at that and said, I'd like to buy the house and kind of tinker on it, out the window. That's not going to happen at all. So we started thinking, okay, it's not going to be a home. How can we reimagine it? And then the concept that essentially came up was we could use these large bedrooms upstairs as offices, and then that rent could help support the lower level, which was a huge, it's a very beautiful open space with all these rooms with these massive pocket doors that open and close. So we thought, what if this was, kind of a multifunctional space where people can do things? And that proposal I took to the city, and I said, hey, this is my idea. And they basically said, do you have money? I said, no. And they said, well, if we give you time, will you find money? And I said, all right, sure, yeah, I'll do that. And they said, you got 3 months, that's it. So we started doing things to kind of garner attention. And one of the things we did was around Christmas time, we had a bonfire. We put some Christmas lights up. We brought a generator that didn't work. The news showed up, and we're sitting there polling at the generator, hoping that it would turn on. But we were just, at this point, we literally said to ourselves, we need to have fun with this. This isn't fun just constantly being told no all the time. We should do something, cool with this. And so this has actually been an annual event that we've done, which is called Light Up the Lee, which, around Christmas time, we try to, get as much Christmas decorations as we can on the house. It's all volunteer-oriented. But this is where that originated. But the discussion online was kind of harsh because it was one way or the other. Tear it down, how great, hope it can be saved. There's nothing in between. There really aren't too many people who don't necessarily have an opinion. So what you end up with is this, complete dichotomy between opinions, where if you really think about it, the tear it down people don't actually care. The people who say it can be saved, those people care. Who should you lean towards? The people who don't care or the people who want to see something cool happen? And that's just kind of the headspace that I had going into all of this. So the third week of the third month, I end up talking to this guy named Alex DePerry, who is a local developer. He wasn't local at the time. He was in Ann Arbor at the time. But now he lives up in Saginaw. He's gotten very invested up here. But he had a lot of things going on in Old Town. And I was talking to Floyd Clark, who was, at the time, the mayor pro tem. And he helped me, kind of navigate how to work through City Hall and all of those types of things. This is the kind of stuff that you're probably not going to deal with if you buy an old house. You don't have to go to City Hall and yell and say, hey, this is what I want to do, and try to gather all this support. But this is kind of just how it just started happening, for me at least, where when you start asking questions, then you're in the city manager's office, and he's telling you got 3 months to figure it out, and then next thing you know, you're not really quite sure what's going to happen, essentially. But there was a point in that 3 months where I decided I was going to say goodbye to the house. This was the old entrance of the house. There was a broken out window that you could just kind of walk into. Not the front door, but it's a door. And so I crawled in there and I just kind of looked around the house, and it just felt doable, and it felt like we were kind of missing an opportunity with this. And I was just walking around looking at everything and just thinking like, it's dirty, but what is it really, is it in that bad of shape? Is it impossible? And they were saying it was going to be $750,000, like, $800,000 to $1 million. And so what I ended up doing was just taking this little scrap as a souvenir, thinking there's no way this is going to work. And then a tree fell on the house, and I was like, oh God, nothing's going our way at all. So what we did is we showed up and we just cut the tree off the house, so hopefully nobody noticed, because we figured if anybody saw that tree, we were done, and it was just going to be over. But like I mentioned, I got in contact with Alex DePerry, and then we did a walkthrough of the house. And he was seeing it and saying, yeah, this is actually very doable. And he's been doing this since the 1960s. He went to U of M, and in the 60s, he started fixing up student housing. And so he's been doing this for decades. And one of the things that we noticed when we were out on the front porch, because he just started traversing this collapsed area like it was nothing. And I remember watching him thinking like, oh, this guy actually, he's ambitious. And so one of the things I noticed was, hey, I've seen this old picture. There's these columns. Are those under there still? Because you can see there's these, and it's all paneled over, but like, what happened to those columns? And Alex's question was, does anybody have a pry bar? And then he just ripped it open. And then he found, yeah, those are under there. All of that, the original look of the house is just hiding under stuff that needs to be thrown away. And so suddenly, it was looking a lot more doable. We came to an agreement with the city. We got a development agreement signed, went to city council, voted unanimously. And it really goes to show that when it comes up as a conversation of should we tear this down, and there's nothing on the table, then they vote to tear it down. If you have something on the table, it's unanimous, including the guy who said tear it down. So when you have these proposals that come forward, it makes you kind of wonder, how often do we miss these opportunities where there's somebody, the Hill House is a fantastic example. Just down the street here on Jefferson, that house was going to get torn down, and because of groups, like that used to exist, like NRS, that used to do all kinds of work in this community, they found a couple out of Indiana who came up here, and they've been restoring it slowly as their retirement home. So there are opportunities if we try. And next thing you know, I've got keys to that house that I previously had to walk into from the broken window. And then, we reached out to an architect, and they volunteered to do some drawings for us. And so suddenly, this entire plan starts to look a little different. It goes from saying, hey, we ought to do this, to like, well, no, this is what it could look like, actually. We could properly do this. This is me the day we signed the development agreement. I grabbed a bottle of champagne. I went to visit the house, drank the champagne, had a good time with it. And then next thing you know, the news is showing up, and there's all kinds of buzz about it. Okay, restoration work is getting started on this house. And then suddenly, it was just blurry for a number of months. And so the house was looking like this, and then it started getting a haircut, and then next thing you know, my God, there's a house behind all of that, which is kind of a crazy thought. But boy, she looks hurt. The very, very beat up. Not looking too great, but a little better, you know, like just a lot better. And there were a lot of people, this is where you can't win. When we tore these trees down, the first comment we got was, "I liked the trees." And so it was just, you know, they were threatening like you can see how close these things are to the house. Like they were threatening the foundation. It was never, they weren't even quality. It's not like we tore down some old growth oak or something like that. We just got rid of all the stuff that was in the way. And so we had a completely different view of the house now. One of my favorite things is this process. This is another project that I'm currently working on. It's actually just down the street from here. And it's amazing what just getting rid of the stuff can do for it. Just getting, you know, like this was an afternoon of work with one of my friends, and we just made it look a lot better than what it was, you know, previously looking like. And then from there, you get into all the other stuff. And I'm going to talk about that house a little bit in a little bit. You might find that your basement when you buy an old house is full of cages. That might be something that you need to get out of the way because you need to put a new electrical panel in. And what I found to be very funny about all of this is people say, oh, the old wiring in the house has, oh God, that knob and tube is so dangerous. Yeah, get rid of it. We replaced it for a reason. Romex exists for a very, very good reason because this stuff burned houses down all the time. So then you put new electrical in and by God, the house has all new electrical. That's a perk. And so there's all of this other stuff that's in the way, and we called, you know, a couple small businesses like that came through, and we did that in a day. And so we were just assembly lining all of this stuff. What I think is interesting about this is that you might think that this house is a unique situation because of the fact that it is the house that it is. I would actually argue the exact opposite, because what I experienced here is the core of community, where asking people and figuring out who wants to help, it doesn't necessarily matter which house it is, because people have a very, very, very giving spirit. And you might not think that, but boy, that's been the case for everything that I've been involved with. And so when it came to clearing it out, I was really inspired by the stories I was hearing from people who lived in the neighborhood who said, I got this done because of my neighbors. This wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the people who live next door to me. So yeah, this is that house on Washington, the cat lady house, and it's got all these headlines and everything, but at the end of the day, it's just a house, and these were just people who wanted to help. And we continue to find that to be the case, that people do want to help. And on that note, we actually had the Harvest Table event that happened on Water Street. They raised a bunch of money, and part of that money they gave to us to put the chimney back in order. So we were able to get this chimney back together, and just like that, one of the most dangerous parts of the house is fixed. The attic was in pretty terrible shape because of the fact that the dormer was starting to drop, and this created a funnel, which was just a blast for every time it rained. It was just waterfall into there and cause all kinds of trouble. These two guys came in, and within a couple hours, they had it completely braced up and fixed. And it was just strange to me because, again, I'm the video guy here watching all this happen, and I'm filming these guys working, and there's that part of me that's going, that's it? That's what you have to do? You just get those guys, or you learn how to do this yourself, or whatever it is, and then you're off and away. This is how the floor of the attic looked because of the roof and the condition of the roof. So roof got torn off, new roof goes on, and suddenly we don't have a disco ball look in our attic anymore, which was very nice. And it didn't rain inside when it rained outside, which was very, very nice. This is directly under that part of the dormer. This is on the first floor, from the attic to the second floor and to the first floor, right onto a piano, which was kind of a bummer. But this area and this part of the house was the area that changed my entire way of thinking about how doable any of this was, because from here, we tore down the wallpaper, loose plaster, all that stuff. There you go. Now it's looking like this. What happens if you do some drywall and some plaster repair and just prime it? Well, now it looks like this. So the difference between that and this is not any miracle of $1 million. It's not anything but plaster, mud, literal mud, gypsum, just very simple things, and then a coat of paint. This is the front porch. The roof of the front porch was absolutely falling apart. We just tore all that out. This is what I referred to as the pit, because this is around the time the volunteers started slowing down, and I was in here in February by myself, just picking stuff up and throwing it out the window, and then going outside and picking it up and throwing it to the dumpster, and then going back inside, picking stuff up and throwing it out the window, and then going outside. Did that for hours on end. But at one point, new joists go in, and then, okay, we can actually walk on this now. That's very interesting. Roof of the porch looked like this. Well, that just goes away, you throw it away, and then you start putting in the new stuff. And so this was all boarded up and enclosed. We heard from the family that the reason this was enclosed was because the smog was actually so bad at the time in the 30s from all the plants and all the coal-fired everything that the wife of Dr. Ryan, which is Emily Ryan, she wanted to go on her front porch without choking, was what I heard from one of the family members. And so they enclosed this front porch. But that's not how the porch is supposed to be. And there's a lot less factories today, unfortunately, than there were in the 30s. So all of that started to come out. We were working on this. And I'm not joking, this is the Saginaw Basin Land Conservancy. They're a local nonprofit that does a lot of work with all kinds of vacant lots and things like that. They drove by, saw us working, had extra crew, and just knocked the whole thing out for us. So they just saw we were working and pulled over. And it's just funny to me because this is the kind of stuff you'd usually have to coordinate. But in this community, if they see you working, they're probably going to come say, hey, what are you doing? And can we help? So this is the transformation that happens there. I actually forgot to add a slide of what this house originally used to look like when it was built, because we got a postcard from one of the family members. This was a brick archway right here. You can actually see the base of the arch. But that got flattened, and they did what was new and hip at the time was these big open porches. So what was a stoop that went to about here was now stretching all the way across the house. So kind of an interesting note of just how these things change and evolve over the years. This is a problem you might not run into. We had a chain link fence over the windows, and for a second we thought, like, why is that? And then it's, oh, right, there was the leopard in the house, and you probably want to keep the leopard in the house. So this is probably a way of doing it. And this glass, when we opened up the windows, we could not believe how heavy the sashes were, and it was because there was plate glass that was like half an inch thick practically. That prevented the cat from breaking through and coming out. But this is a window that I've actually heard people say they saw the cat just sitting in, looking at all the traffic on Washington, just flicking its tail around, which is a lot like our cat Chip at home. He has a nice perch, and he looks, and I just like to picture him as a leopard sometimes and try to imagine what that would be like. This is where Chichu lived, or this is where he slept at least, in the basement. Or this is where they kept him or fed him. I'm not exactly sure what exactly the use of this cage was, but knowing that they had full reign of the house was one thing, but seeing this was kind of another, like, oh my God, that actually is a leopard. But this is what the inside of that cage was like. But we ended up removing that because what do you do with that except, maybe put some bad kids in there or something from time to time, or like, we didn't know what to do, really, so what we did was we just removed it. I kept some key pieces of it like this because that's just incredible. You can't really fake that. And that became where we put the temporary furnace. So now we've got heat. We've got heat, we've got a roof, we've got new electrical, and things are just moving along. There are areas like this that's like, well, do we have to restore this? No, that's actually not even supposed to be there. Down it goes. And so it just turns into a whole pile of rubble. And then you get rid of the rubble, and now you have a bigger room. And now it's actually looking more like the way it's supposed to be built. And so this has actually turned into a window shop for me, where I've just been repairing the windows of the house slowly throughout time. You got other piles like this. Me and Matt actually tried to move this because we wanted to keep it very badly. And on the heave of the heave-ho, it just completely disintegrated into 1,000 pieces. So there was really nothing that we could do with it. But all that goes away, and suddenly the things that seem scary, it's trash. It's just trash. It's things that need to go in the garbage. And this is the kind of stuff that people point at and go, oh my God, this house is so scary. It's trash. Just put the trash into the dumpster and move on. The hardware. Oh my God, we need new windows. No, you don't. You need new glazing. Maybe some storm windows. That hardware cleans up very, very easily, and it works great. So we have all of the original hardware that was in the house. We have mostly the original windows because we had to repair some of them, but we didn't put vinyl anywhere because that is, like I said, I'm on the HDC, and that's a cardinal sin, is replacing your wood windows. And so the house, this was the day after we cut the trees down, but then suddenly it just starts taking a lot of shape. And usually when I give this presentation, I end up getting stuck on this, just going back and forth like 1,000 times, because this is just satisfying as all get out for me. Because the thing about this is probably about a year into the project, and there was a point where I went to a meeting and somebody said, they're not getting anything done with that house. And we've been inside the house for months, and we've filled 6 dumpsters. And we were just working our buns off, and then somebody says, they're not doing anything with that place. Nothing's getting done. We fixed the windows, and we did a little bit of paint. Oh my God, you guys are doing a great job with that house. It looks so good. So I'm a little resentful of the fact that we worked so hard, and people couldn't see it until we did something that's actually really not all that crazy. Because if you look at it, trash, 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 repair, repair, new roof, ta-da, and some paint. That's what got us to this point. And then it started to look a little better this way too, where we just continued on that path, moving forward. We're currently in a war right now with color swatches to figure out what we're going to do with the gables from here. And whenever I say that we're going to paint the house, we're not painting the brick. Do not be alarmed. We are just painting all the wood elements of the house, and they're currently primed. White was not the color we went with. That was primer, and right now we're trying to get to the next parts. So what we did at a certain point, because the investor we had up front said, I'm not going to fund this whole thing. You got to figure out how to make this happen. It's a program through the MEDC, and it's called Public Spaces, Community Places. And we wanted to turn the house into a public space. We wanted to give it a community function. And they have a program where if you raise $25,000, the MEDC matches you $25,000. So we raised about $38,000, and we got the match. And then from there, we went straight from that. We got our funds deposited in February of 2020, and nothing weird happened after that. So we essentially got completely shut down, is what happened. The entire process, the supply chain issues, the prices of lumber, the prices of everything exploded. Copper explodes, everything explodes. And so, the original budget we had for finishing the house was now completely irrelevant. But this is kind of how it broke down for us, because we've spent about $170,000, and a chunk of that is grants, a chunk of that is donations, and a chunk of that is private equity. And we've just been trying to figure out, it's not an investment strategy for us. It's about how do we finish this thing? What's next? Where do we get the money for a furnace? Where do we get the money for a parking lot? Where do we get the money for this? And we just kept figuring out the next thing. And this community has been so good to us. And I'm forever, forever grateful for that, because I had no idea what I was doing getting into this. So then the spindles and things like that, we start working on the fine details, and these things are beautiful, but then you get to the top of the steps, and apparently there was a piano upstairs that someone wanted really bad, so the way they did that was they knocked out the entire railing, and then they replaced it with some 2x6s, which works great as a railing, but we figured, the aesthetic of it we might want to improve, and so we found a local mill that for $800, we got 30 of these made, and we were able to just completely redo the entire area. And so you start to see the before and afters of this kind of thing too, where these are the same rooms, and I wish I would have put a daytime picture in here, because it is much, much prettier during the day. But you'll notice this, that beautiful, like that whole mantle and that whole surround of the fireplace. If you go back to this picture, well, there's the top, there's the side, there are pieces of this thing. There's another piece right here, and then there were pieces upstairs, and we just put the puzzle together, and then, the whole thing was just there. It was just scattered throughout the house, and thank God we didn't just do a cleanup where someone was like, what's this hunk of marble, and threw it into a dumpster, and that's why I was meticulous about every single thing that went into the dumpster. This boarded up part we removed, and we saw, this is that entrance that I showed you earlier. That got fixed up pretty quick, actually. And this was a terrifying thing, because if you notice, the whole sill right here is completely rotted out, and we had to replace that. And the only way to do that was to lift this part up slightly, which means lifting up the entire wall of the house. So we had to gently push up about 15 feet of brick to just gently get it up enough that we could put the new sill in there. But that's what God or letters can do to your house. Here's another room that I wanted to be my office, and so I made it into my office. And these rooms are starting to turn into the offices now, where we're starting to see now that scary look is actually rather cozy when you take the plywood off and when you hit it with shellac. That's another funny thing about this room. Like the other one when I showed you was plaster and paint. The wallpaper came down. These curtains were a little moldy, so we weren't going to repurpose them. But some paint and some shellac, that's what you get. You just remove the plywood, and that change is so drastic. It's just amazing to me. The world's greatest wallpaper on the wall, which we actually have scraps of the wallpaper that we have that are for sale that we use as a fundraiser, because we figured it'd be a cool way to kind of raise money with this by using what we were throwing away as pieces of the house that you could take home. So this goes from an area that you can't walk in or else you're going to fall through to the front foyer to a spot that you can now lay down on, which I did the moment we finished that. I laid down and just did kind of like a sprawled out, very satisfying, not falling through the floor feeling. And we just started refinishing the floors, we started touching up the woodwork, and we're just moving right along. There used to be a safe in here. This house was vacant for years. Safe's gone. But we just covered that part up and painted and a little more shellac. Refinished the floors ourselves. We got about a $30,000 quote for it, and we said, well, you can rent the orbital floor sander at Menards for like 24 bucks. And it's $2 every, like hour after every 4 hours that you do it. So we just rented that, threw on some headphones, and then coat of polyurethane and some stain, and off and away we go. So we were just watching YouTube videos doing this stuff and just learning how to do it. And I've always enjoyed the fact that it was just a group of people who were just learning as we go with guidance, from someone who's been doing it for a while. But for the most part, we were just figuring this stuff out as we went. This glass up top, this beautiful arched piece, that was missing when we got the house. And it was actually returned back to us about 2 years into the project. We had it covered up with some insulation stuffed in there, some OSB covering it. And it was actually right after one of the former mayors, Greg Branch, he was huge inspiration to me, huge mentor to me. He passed away, and this glass was returned about, I'd say a day after he passed, actually. And they said, we want this to be anonymous, but we want it to be in Greg's memory. So this room is now the Greg Branch room, and this glass, every time I see it, I think of the guy. The tattoo on my arm of the watch is actually Greg's watch. And that guy meant the world, and it's that much more meaning whenever you look at this and you just think about what would we have replaced that with? Like we had a big open hole here. What would we have done otherwise? It's irreplaceable. This is one of my favorite moments of the entire project. We turned all the lights on, and I went outside, and I'd never seen the house so lit up before. And it was, after driving by it so many times, blight just blurs into the landscape, and you start ignoring it, and you don't really think about it much. And there's something emotional that happens when this happens. And that was one of my favorite parts of this whole process, was just standing on the corner of Hoyt and Washington and just looking at this thing and just admiring it. So why did I bring this house up? Because the things that we learned from this project, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, you had an investor up front. That's helpful. You found grants and donations. That's helpful. So one of the things that we've been doing is thinking about this from the perspective of how does this happen for your everyday person who's looking for a home. We have a massive housing shortage right now. That is one of the top conversations in pretty much any circle right now, that we do not have places for people to move into. what we did was we bought a house from the land bank, and this house cost me a whopping $200. We are throwing houses away, and they are $200 if you take them off the demo list. So the thought that we have is this. This house isn't in great shape. I will admit the foundation is collapsed. The roof, terrible shape. There's a huge hole in it. But this house has amazing bones, and a foundation can be fixed. A roof can be fixed. So let's think about this from the financial, the aspect of it. Let's say we need a new foundation. Oh my God, it's going to be $8,000. Cool, $8,000. We're now at $8,200 all in. New roof, $20,000. Okay, $28,200. We're going to repair the windows and everything. We're using glass from buildings from downtown and from Old Town where they took the windows out and threw them away, and I went and grabbed them off the corner, and we cut the glass out of it, and we use the glass to fix these windows now. So every window that's being repaired is being repaired with free trash glass that people are throwing away. And this is the kind of glass that sells for 30 cents a square inch. It is expensive because it's wavy and it's beautiful and everybody and they don't make it anymore because they used to pour this glass by hand essentially. And people look at this and they say, oh, this is beautiful, beautiful glass, but then they have a window company come by that says, you need new windows because I sell windows, and then they replace all of their windows. So we come in, we grab that glass. Glass didn't cost us anything. The glazing was $40. So we're at $28,240, all in. That's a new foundation, a new roof. Let's do new electrical. Let's say it's let's say it's 10 grand. We're up to 38,000. Okay. Let's do new plumbing. We spent about $8,000 on the whole house at the Lee, so we're in the $40,000 range right now. The average home price is around $200,000, and we're at $48,000, and people are looking at it saying, you'll never get your money back. This is a $48,000 house 4 blocks away from a house that just recently sold for $250,000. How does that make any sense? And the way that we see this is that you can take a house like this that we are throwing away. You can use materials that we are throwing away. And you can just bring people together to get things done quickly. And this is the Community Development Corporation that we're getting going. This is our pilot project right now to say, if you put this house back together and you got a budget of, let's say, $50,000, you know what your mortgage is? It's about $300 a month. I was spending $1,200 a month in Colorado. That's what I was running away from. I found a house for $36,000, snagged it, and then my rent became $150. But my rent was now a mortgage, and I own the house. Homeownership is unheard of in this area, and it needs to change because that's the way you build strong neighborhoods, is people who are invested in what they have, and not some guy who lives in Atlanta who bought a property sight unseen and is going to flip it for $30,000 and turn it into something that he put no effort into at all, and you get to do all the work and pay for whatever the favor he did of buying it from the land bank and selling it to you at about a 10,000% markup. So when we think about the neighborhood, though, and this is where it comes down to, we need to stop tearing things down. Very bluntly, I'm going to say that one more time. We need to stop tearing things down, because we have gone way too far. This neighborhood is the neighborhood that we're in. You're currently sitting right here. This neighborhood was entered into the National Register in 1979. So this went into the National Register about 12 years before I was born. And at the time, it had 390 buildings. Today, we have 263 that have been demolished. 2/3 of this neighborhood is now gone because over and over and over, we looked at houses just like this and said, that's not worth it, and we tore it down. And we lose old growth lumber that's never coming back, craftsmanship that's never coming back, all kinds of things that go into these homes that's not coming back because we don't have 400, 500, 600 years to grow a tree. These guys got all of the virgin growth. They got everything, and they clear-cut the whole area, and that's how you got Shields, because that was all forest, and now it's clear-cut, and it's all farmland. And we are losing all of these properties at a massive rate because we don't think it's worth it. And it is not because it's not possible. It's because people don't think it's worth it. And if that's where we're coming from, we're right back to that conversation of tear it down. Oh God, I hope it can be safe. That'd be wonderful. If we are in that conversation, the person I do not want making these decisions is the person whose entire headspace is tear it down because it's all junk, it's all garbage. That is insanity because these are homes, and we have people who do not have homes in this community. We have people who are renting, paying astronomical amounts that could totally afford a mortgage. And so the way that we have abandoned this concept of community for the fact that these are products now that you can flip and sell and transfer, I see these as homes, and I encourage you to look at them the same way as well. If you have any questions or anything you want to be involved with, this is all of the contact info that you could need, but that's my spiel for now, and I just wanted to encourage everybody to think about old houses differently, to stop telling people, I don't really know, because at the end of the day, if you don't want to sell the house and you want to die in it, it doesn't matter what the resale value is. If you want to live your life in a house, who cares what the market does? Because you can have a home for the low, low price of way less than what everybody else is paying. So I think that's how we rebuild the community. I think that's where we need to be putting a lot of energy and money. And this entire project with the house is the reason why I feel that way, because I watched it happen and I feel very, very, very strongly about it. So I'm not sure if I have any time for questions or anything like that.
We do have just shy of 10 minutes for questions. So
yeah.
First, thank you.
Thank you.
But yes, I'm sure you have questions.
You know, I noticed it's a brick home, and a brick home would be more fire resistant than wood homes.
Yeah.
Was there any thought behind the original house or so?
I think the one before it was probably brick. But one of the things that you might notice, actually, I've only got like 130 slides here, so like give me a second to get back to it. But when we, actually, I'll just do it the easy way. These mill fires that I talked about, this is pretty much what happens when you have a brick building in a fire. There's a lot of fire resistance to that, but the floor joists are all wood, very well dried wood, nice old dry wood. So these things were just tinder boxes, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, when you don't have piles of sawdust or exposed knob and tube wiring, it's not as much of a problem. But they have a lot more integrity, I'll say that, but we had a building that burned, was that last year or the year before over on Genesee? Massive brick building, but the moment that those floor joists were gone, the building was just doing this. And so they had to bring it down as a safety measure because they didn't see a point in trying to stabilize it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and your point of important health, I agree. Get looked at by the bus systems because I think the bus, like, you're ready to taught how to do that, but I started with 275 Brentwood, Howard, I didn't really care for a house, and I said, that's the house. And then when I moved, my dad moved me out, I went paying $495. I was like, some of these appliances and stuff that do work, that's way too much. And call the dealer, like, I afford something like at $500, so I started that way.
Mm-hmm.
$500 mortgage. But you don't know what's going to happen in the future, who acts right through, because 15, 20 years later, my grandma gave me an inheritance, so it's all paid off.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm on disability, and those kids are on disability at the bus station, but as long as they have a part-time job, we can keep up with the house.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how people think that everyone has the same experience, that that everyone's buying houses the same way, and that they've got a massive down payment that they're working with. There are people who who are on disability, like you mentioned. There are programs that help people like this.
They don't buy houses. They think that they're getting Section 8, that's a good deal, but
Yeah.
you don't have to keep on moving.
Yeah.
I stayed there 20 years this year. 20 years in the same house.
That's amazing. And there are programs too that turn those vouchers into mortgages.
Grants already come, and that helps out. Everything in the house is brand new. I'm still trying to fix it and get my job too.
It's a lifelong thing, but honestly, I feel the same way where, you know, not to put it kind of morbidly, but like there are people who talk about homes in a way that it's like, well, it's not worth it. And then they'll say, well, I got to go get surgery now on my shoulder. Oh, that sounds expensive. That's going to be a lot of rehab. And oh boy, I don't, you know, like there's this headspace that people have towards what it will cost. And I'm just of the opinion that like, I don't go to Disney World or anything like that, but there are people who spend thousands of dollars on that. I'll spend thousands on new wiring for my house. Yeah.
Got one in the back first.
Oh, that is a fantastic question. So when we acquired the house, what we did not learn was that we did not have an occupancy permit, and there is an entire process from converting a home from a residence to a commercial use. And then from there, it's even further defined by what is your commercial use? Is it a gallery? Is it an office? What are you using it for? And then that dictates how many parking spots you need. And there's this entire, it's like the thread of a sweater that you just keep pulling, and it's, oh my God, this just keeps going. But we were having art shows there. We were having all kinds of things. And the art show, I actually have a letter from the city that says, it was observed you had an art show, and you're not allowed to do that. And I just thought that that was the funniest thing of like, well, we were just having an art show, and you know, it was very successful. We had lots of people coming through all the time. But in terms of commercial code, there are things, and this is the hardest part too, because when we say the house wasn't up to code, they picture it on day one. You know, they think that we're talking about falling through the floor and things like that. We're talking about not having enough parking spots and having a ramp into the house, which is something we've been working on for a long time to try to figure that out. But you can't build the ramp until you have the parking spot, because you need all of that to kind of flow together. And it's just what we're currently working towards is figuring out what we need to do in order to get reopened. And just the things that are happening on that block too. There's a lot of stuff going on right now that makes it a big old question mark for what exactly we're allowed to do in the future. That was my question. Really? Yeah, that's. I'll be candid. That sounds about right. Yeah, we haven't necessarily had a warm embrace in that sense. It's been made to kind of feel like an obstacle, like that this property in particular is a hurdle that we need to work around. When I think it's an asset. You know, I think this is something we could easily be working with, and I really wish that the grassroots efforts around here were viewed more as a what do you need instead of how do I get you out of my way. And the idea that it is me and you and not me versus you or me or you, there is room for everybody in this, and that's been a very tricky place to navigate for us of figuring out, you know, there's a political dynamic to this house that if you buy a house from the land bank, I promise you, you're probably not going to have to deal with. So.
I'm going to just make sure the light.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets temperamental.
Thank
So
you.
make sure that works.
Thank you
for
very much.
I would think that when you're rehabilitating Sunnyville neighborhoods and you have homeowners coming into these kind of
Keep this open so when you.
Yes.
eyes for the neighborhood,
Yep.
I would think that was the case. And the second thing is, have you gotten into any of the nearby communities like Bay City, for example, which has a lot of old homes, and they seem like they've done a pretty good job of rehabilitating those homes?
Yeah. So the crime element, the fact that these houses really do, like, there are two ways to look at it. On one hand, there's a great example, actually. There's a house that's also on South Washington, all the way down the way, more towards, you know, you go past, like, the water treatment plant and keep going. There is a house that is a nuisance. The land bank's had it for years and years. And it's been a nuisance because people keep breaking into it. People were dealing drugs out of it or something like that. And they said, oh my God, this house is a nuisance. It needs to be torn down. I have found 3 buyers now that want the house, and they won't sell it because it is a nuisance property. And there's such an irony there because it needs to be torn down, apparently. But putting someone in the house would actually stop that problem. Usually people don't like go into fully occupied homes and try to set up shop. That's not something that happens. Vacant houses are obvious. They're overgrown, and there's this element of I won't be seen in that house. And so the more that you have people taking on these individual properties and making them look nice and bringing, like them back into being a home and people have a vested interest in that, you're always looking out across the street. I let my neighbor know when his front porch light's out. There's always this communal element that happens naturally within neighborhoods because people care about where they are at. That's where rental properties are very, very, very dangerous, is if people do not care, anything can happen in those. But you are exactly correct that putting people in these homes is actually one of the best things you can do for the issues like crime, because then you have occupied homes that are also back on the tax rolls. So now we're making more property taxes, and it just kind of, it just builds. On the note about the other communities like Bay City, the trickiest thing is that if you look at the difference between the Tri-Cities, it's pretty drastic. And what we're dealing with in Saginaw, the issues in Saginaw are very different than the ones in Bay City. There are many different dynamics at play in Bay City that they can kind of, this is a much easier conversation to have in places like Bay City. Historic districts are much stricter. You have all of Center Avenue. They didn't use this urban renewal money to level whole neighborhoods. There are small areas that they did, but we had wholesale entire neighborhoods. So we have different issues, but we're all very similar. It's like we're all siblings, but we have our own things that we're trying to work through here, where the conversation is different from municipality to municipality. And that's kind of the interesting thing, is that the house, like the Lee in Chicago, that's not a $25,000 house. That's a $900,000 to millions. Like that price explodes in other areas, but because of where it is. But I personally don't have the opinion that there are such thing as bad neighborhoods, because they were once great neighborhoods. And now they're, it's never the environment's problem, it's the social dynamics and the people within them. So it really doesn't, it has nothing to do with the buildings, it has nothing to do with the fact that there's a hole in the roof, it has everything to do with the fact that we've really kind of broken apart the concept of community into a bunch of different ways, and things are just different than they were at the time of the construction of these. So rediscovering community is one of those things that's going to be very tricky for us, but very worthwhile.
It sounds like the best place to end it. We are out of time, but maybe you're willing to stay and
Absolutely,
answer
yeah. If there's any questions,
for
I will
people.
be here, yeah.
So, but thank you all for your time, and
Thank you. I appreciate it.